How's it going, class? This is week 14 of our lab, archaeological lab. Last week we covered the basics of archaeoastronomy, and this week we're getting a little more depth with it with Calendrics. So this is the primary and assignment for this, as well as the video. Mostly what I want to talk about is some very specific issues regarding archaeoastronomy and the mechanics of how we basically look at the science. Last week, I gave you kind of a brief example of how we can use azimuths to see if we see cultures using astronomical bodies in the sky, whether or not they're using those for constructing their sites. All right, and I gave you example of Moundville, and I gave you example of Cahokia, and how they would use perhaps angles from one mound to another, and how they would line those so they can like predict specifically where the sun might come up on a solstice, for example. All right, so that for the purpose of agricultural reasons. Today we're going to get a little more depth into that. And we're going to talk about specifically the calendars themselves, all right? So this, I hope this will not be a long video, but I hope this will cover a lot more in depth about what we were doing last week, so we can get a better idea as we move into Mesoamerican calendars, as we're going to do this week, all right, and try to understand what we might expect to find with them, the information that's codified of them, and as researchers, what we can do to use that information and how we can get to that and understand more about the culture that existed in the past. Trying to get close to that emic perspective. Now, a calendar is basically now I'm sorry, I'm reading from my notes here over here, so understand if I constantly look away from the cameras because I'm looking over here at my notes, right? But a calendar is a system of organization of days. What that means is that to a particular culture, and its importance will vary, mattering on which society or period we're discussing. All right. But more to the point, we can assume that most, if not all, the symbolic, mathematical, and religious beliefs of a given culture and systems are in some way tied to the calendar that they use. Another example of a calendar is an almanac, which is, in the more proper terminology, hermerology, meaning that it's a form of a predictive system to forecast time and events that's going to happen, right? Usually for agricultural purposes. The Greeks called it a prepamira, and that's what the symbol you see, the picture of prepamira, that uses both the zodiac and other information to provide a forecasting of what you're going to be doing after your day or week, or whatever else, right? And also, again, for agricultural purposes and planting and liturgical reasons as well, religious beliefs and all that going with it. Religious or liturgical systems, a system of feast days and religious ritual associated with calendrical events that's practicing in a rotating schedule. We see this in Roman Catholic calendars. We see this in Jewish calendars, Buddhist, Islamic, whatever else, right? They'll use a calendrical system that's based around the idea of what's going on in the religious system. And for planting, agricultural, calendar devised for the purpose of seasonal agricultural cycles. And this is an obvious one, because if you don't have that capability to know when to plant, you can't maximize your yield. All right, if you ever come from a farming community, you know what I mean when I talk about this. That if you don't have a system to know exactly when to plant and when to harvest, because as you guys already know, corn takes 120 frost-free days to be able to get it up and out of the field. If you want 2 of these harvests, you got to know exactly when to plant at the beginning of the year. So this is incredibly important information for a culture to have regarding food production. Calendrical systems, basically they fall into 3 categories. Lunar calendars are synchronized to the motion of the moon. An example is the Islamic calendar. All right. Solar calendars are based on perceived seasonal changes, synchronized to the apparent motion of the sun, An example is the Persian calendar. We also see this in other locations. We can pretty well sure that most of the calendars we see from Europe are solar as well. Then lunar solar calendars are based on both a combination of solar and lunar reckonings. Examples include the traditional calendar of China, the Hindu calendar of India, and the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar. They use both this information to rectify each other. The idea is that with both going on at the same time, you're able to one can make sure you can rectify for the other. All right, so you're never going to be off is the idea. You have both going on at the same time. Gregorian calendar is a solar calendar, but it's based on older information. I want to make that perfectly clear that there is lunar aspects to this calendar as well as solar, all right? But primarily it's a solar calendar. It's based off of the 365.2422 tropical year that is determined by the Earth's revolution around the sun. It is an improvement on the improvement in the West. It's an improvement as the West adopted it in 1582 over the Julian calendar, since the Roman times, which was off by one day every 128 years, while the new Gregorian one that was adopted was only off by one day every 7,700 years. And we fixed that by adding leap years to it and more extensive leap years and figuring out exactly where to put them. This is the calendrical system that nearly the entire world has currently adopted. As obviously this is a variation of the Roman version, our modern calendar is based off the Greco-Roman symbolism and Roman Catholic liturgical systems, as well as our days of the week are based off of Norse mythology. For example, Thursday is Thor's Day. All right, we see this quite often in a lot of different things that we've named. All right, if you look at the names of the specific months of the calendar, you'll notice associations with Caesars or specific gods. June for Juno, things of that nature. But how does society create and rectify a calendar? Well, the easiest way to describe this is to say that calendars are usually based on astronomical information. Like I said, it's usually based on a solar or a lunar or something of that nature, right? But we also check it by way of other astronomical events, planets, moons, things of that nature, or for example, Halley's Comet. This information is usually fairly consistent. The sun, for example, does not vary year to year in its azimuth. It's always going to come up on certain points at certain times of the year. Thus, we have the equinoxes and the solar the solstices. We know full well whether they're going to come up at what point over the horizon at the aspect they're going to rise. So we can base a yearly time frame on the aspect of where that sun rises at. The moon is also consistent. It has an 18.6 yearly cycle of minor and major standstills, meaning that every 18.6 years it follows the same cycle. So we can gauge and rectify calendars based on that information. Nearly all the rest of the astronomical phenomenon that we see in the sky is ultimately fairly predictable. For example, Halley's Comet again returns every 75 years. We can associate exactly when we are at what time frame in the calendar and set our time frame and make sure it's correct by this astronomical information. But one of the most important aspects to understand this, right, from the archaeological standpoint of view, the Archeoastronomical let me rephrase that. The Archeoastronomy standpoint of view, I'll get that word out of my mouth eventually, is the stars are the gods. Deities are usually associated with specific astronomical phenomena. We already know this, all right? In the Greco-Roman tradition, Jupiter is the main god of that pantheon, which is associated with Zeus for the Greek. And we see this over and over again in each deity, each hero myth, usually most religious and or ideological concepts within that given culture can be associated with some planetary or cosmic body, one that can either see with the naked eye or happens to occur in a cyclic nature over a period of time. A perfect example of this is the 12 signs of the zodiac. which are normally associated with Greek, Roman, Norse, Egyptian, and Babylonian, even modern versions of that cultural mythology. And in the pictures you see before you have the actual constellations there as associated, possibly associated with the specific zodiac signs, all right, which are also associated with the specific Greek gods that go along with them. This information is something that we see constantly over and over and over again in a variety of different systems, well, a variety of different cultures all around the world. So based on that information alone, we're able to get a great deal of codified body of knowledge about the culture itself based on understanding their calendar. Codified information within calendar. Calendars are associated with religious belief, cultural religious belief. Religious beliefs are associated with agriculture, and agriculture is associated with calendars. I mean, these three things play into each other: the calendrical systems, the religious beliefs, right, and the agriculture. This is an aspect of one of the most consistent things we find in nearly all cultures across the globe, and within the agricultural records since the time of the agricultural revolution, some 10 to 12,000 years ago. When we say God's country, like the popular song that's right now on the radio, okay, there's no reason to say this tongue in cheek. This is an obvious aspect of culture you'll find everywhere regarding agriculture. The people on the land are associated specifically with knowledge of the calendar because they have to have that information for agricultural purposes. And those agricultural purposes are associated with these things. The calendar associated with the culture of religious beliefs because that is a part of the system overall. Each one of these three things played into each other. All right. And as we understand that, then we can gain information about all three by understanding the calendar. Agricultural and calendrical systems. If you've ever spent any time in a farming community at all, you know that a calendar is probably the most important tool in agriculture as knowing when to plant based on the seasons is the best way to maximize one's harvest and yield. An example of a calendrical system that's common to the farming community is that dates back to the Roman era is the almanac. The Old Farmer's Almanac is not just a collection of dates for planting or forecasting advice, much like how astrology uses the zodiac, as you will find a general information and knowledge regarding folklore, myths, traditions, trends, recipes, and also other cultural articles within it. More to the point, contained within the almanac is the culture itself, tied to its pages just as adeptly as one might expect for any of the ancient culture produced in their calendrical system. So when we talk about calendars, realize that the calendars that we have today, that you see on your computer or a paper one or wherever else, is devoid about 90% of the cultural information that usually was associated with it. All right, the name's still there. All right, Juno for June, or Augustus for August, whatever else. Right, Thor for Thor's day. The information is still there in the names, but at one time, especially when we're talking about a society that was centered around the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, the calendrical system was associated with a tremendous amount of information that was associated specifically with the culture itself. Feast days, liturgical holidays, all those various different things were entombed within that calendar, right? And it was part of it was a part of the system that people lived in until we got to the modern era when we start secularizing most of these things, right? But when you think about it from the perspective of an archaeologist, that emic perspective, right? When you're looking at a society 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years ago, that information is still codified within their systems of belief, within their calendrical systems, and that's the stuff we're trying to get to. For example, Mesoamerican Codexes and calendar stones. Essentially, what you find within the Mayan books or codexes, like the Dresden Codex, is in fact an almanac. It's not just a collection, not just a calendar system, but an entire set of religious and liturgical information that performs divination, forecasts astronomical events, and serves as an agricultural guide to when to plant and when to harvest. As well as we can match this information with calendar stones that are also based on astronomical data and current ethnographic data from the people that live today that show the yearly system and work out to a decent degree the behavior and beliefs of that ancient culture. It's this combination of astronomical observation, religious beliefs, and agricultural information that allows us to researchers to understand the behavior of these cultures as close to we can to that image perspective. It is a literal time machine that takes us back to their world from their perspective. Now, if you understand how all these things work together, the calendar, the agricultural, religious system, how they work hand in hand with each other, right? Then you understand how the importance of Archeoastronomy actually is, because that's what we're aiming at, is the literal culture they practice, their belief systems on a daily basis itself, all right? And that's what we're aiming at when we're trying to get to that information. By understanding the calendar and understanding how it's associated with their agricultural aspects and the religious aspects, and how all three of these things play in together, we understand literally an incredibly great framework for the entire culture into itself. Now, this is the assignment. Let me roll my thing down here a little bit. One of the calendars that we deal with in North America is the Mesoamerican version, but specifically the Mayan, as it's probably the one we have the most information about, as the Maya are still around to tell us how they work. We still get able to get that ethnographic data from them, all right, and ask them specifically. But we can't get everything from them because they don't have all that knowledge that has been lost, all right, over hundreds if not thousands of years. Now, this lab I have in front of you is going to be really easy to do. It's going to come in two parts. First, I want you to read this paper, which is Astronomical Deities in Ancient Mesoamerica. It's a short paper. It's going to give you some good information about Mesoamerica and specifically how they related to their specific, how they looked at astronomical deities, or as we talked about in this article, in this video today. Then I want you to look at the site, and this is nothing more than a Wikipedia site for the Mayan calendar. All right, it's going to explain to you, probably better than most I've seen out there, how the Mayan calendar actually works. All right, and I'm going to give you this calculator. All right, and I want you to look at all three, and then I want you to answer the following questions in an essay format. 1. How does Susan Milbrath relate to the astronomy of the Maya, their mythology, and their calendar? How are they all connected? Why would the Maya care about dry seasons? What is the connecting force that drives these aspects together? Tell me in your own words, all right? No more than 3 essay paragraphs. 2. Explain the difference between the sacred round, the calendar round, and the long count in the Mayan system. How do they work together? And use no more than 5 essay paragraphs for that. And 3, using the last website, I want you to calculate the long count date and the calendar round date for your birthday and the date 12/3/2020. This will include the Zulkin and the Habab. Explain what each number means, all right, in that calendar system that you write out, all right. This should not take you very long to do. Have everything in by 12/10/2020 at 11:59 p.m. on the Canvas site, all right, upload it there, and we got one more week to go, and next week will be, I promise you, an easy week. We're just going to probably watch a video and talk about some of my own research in Archeoastronomy, and that will be it, and there will be no final for this class. So that's the entire video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see your guys' papers fairly soon. Oh, one last thing. As of today, I will finish up all the grading, and I'll get everything settled as far as that is concerned, and have that all worked out by probably midnight tonight. If not, I'll have the rest of it done by tomorrow. So you should have a updated grade. I have noticed that there are several people who have not turned in an assignment for week 12 yet. You may want to get on that. It was due last Thursday. So please get on that, hop on that, and get those points, all right? Because we only got one more week after this to finish this up. So y'all have a great day and get that stuff into me. Have a good one.